Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, welcome. My name is Katie Hawkins. I am the California Program Manager for Outdoor Alliance, and welcome to our first town hall of the year. We are so excited for this amazing town hall with great panelists, but also our special guest, Congressman Levin from the 49th District. I would first like just to give a land acknowledgement. I am calling in to you from the ancestral land of the Washoe tribe here in the heart of Lake Tahoe, Truckee, California. So before we begin, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping. We are going to have question and answer at the end of our panel discussion. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to use the chat, or excuse me, the chat or the question and answer portion on the Zoom features, as well as we are recording this and we are live on Facebook. So welcome again. And also we are honored to be able to offer American Sign Language, and we have two amazing interpreters. We have Jessica and Norma. Okay, so with that, before we begin, just so that we know who's attending right now, we wanted to launch into a poll, okay? So can we get that poll started? Okay, so everyone, where are you joining us from? Are you joining us from the 49th District?
Wouldn't let me take it.
And what organizations are you representing? Government agencies, nonprofits, brand, travel, tourism, or self? And then really give us kind of a feel of what you would like to talk about during this town hall. The Great American Outdoors Act, 30 by 30, public land protections, first 100 days. And you need to be able to scroll down, everyone. I know we're still getting used to Zoom after maybe a year into this, but scroll down and we'll get these results here. But let me kind of launch into here. Again, special guest, Congressman Levin. But first I'd like to have our panelists self-introduce themselves so you get to know them better. So Pete, please start us off.
Yeah, hi everyone. Pete Stauffer, Environmental Director with the Surfrider Foundation. I'm based in San Clemente, California, which is the 49th District, and also the land of the Hashiman Nation, who are the original inhabitants of Orange County. Surfrider is a grassroots organization that works to protect our coast and ocean for all people. And we greatly appreciate Congressman Levin's leadership on these issues.
Right back at you, Pete.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Duncan. I'm the Senior Director of Programs at Outdoor Outreach, based here in San Diego, the ancestral lands of the Kumeyaay people. Our organization, Outdoor Outreach, works to connect youth to the transformative power of the outdoors, helping to cultivate the next generation of environmental stewards.
Hey everybody, my name is Dave Donaldson. I'm a co-founder of Operation AMP. We're a nonprofit that started in Southern California. We work with ill, injured, and disabled servicemen and women, their family members and caregivers, and we teach them how to surf. I am joining you today from my new home in Whitefish, Montana, the ancestral home of the Salish and Kootenai Native Americans. And Mr. Levin, thank you very much for your work with the outdoors. I'm sure we could have some very interesting conversations about our past histories in Southern California.
Terrific.
Excellent. And then I'd like to introduce our special guest, Congressman Levin, who represents the 49th District, which includes North County, San Diego, and South Orange County. After graduating from Stanford and Duke University Law, Representative Levin worked as an attorney focused on energy and environmental law. In addition to his work, the congressman served on the board of the Center for Sustainable Energy and co-founded Sustain OC, helping accelerate the transition towards more sustainable power generation, transportation alternatives. As a member of Congress, some of Levin's top priorities are combating climate change, capitalizing on the economic benefits of sustainable energy future, and providing solutions to the hazardous nuclear waste at the San Onofre Nuclear Generation Station. And we'll be talking about that. And then the representative has also been a champion in efforts to expand access to affordable healthcare, lower cost of higher education, preserving Social Security and Medicare, preventing gun violence, women's rights to choose. He is a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the Future Forum, and is the grandson of the immigrants from Mexico. He is a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. So everyone, please welcome our special guest, Congressman Mike Levin.
Well, thank you so much, Katie, for that kind introduction. I'm super grateful to be with you all, coming to you from Washington, D.C., where it has been a very interesting time. We have votes coming up, so I have to eventually go and vote, but we'll have plenty of time for discussion before that. I want to thank all the folks who contributed to this event and all the great advocacy for our outdoors. I saw Pete from Surfrider. Thanks to them for all the work that they do. We're so grateful. I want to thank my team as well that has worked very hard. It takes a village, as you know. It takes a great team of people to get things done. And we've got our Deputy Chief of Staff, Jonathan Gilbert, who handles our environmental and energy portfolio, who's on the Zoom as well. If you have any tough questions, he can answer. But I'm happy to as well. But, you know, I think in looking at that poll, I saw that there are a lot of people from different parts of California. I believe, as I think any good coastal California member of Congress would believe, that I have the most beautiful district in America. And it's 52 miles of precious coastline from Dana Point all the way down to UC San Diego. And we can argue over what part of California is the most beautiful, but I think it's our incredible district. And when I think about our district, I think about how precious it is, but also how we have to protect it because of things like coastal erosion and climate change. And so one of my great objectives in Congress has been to protect our precious resources up and down our California coast. And it's going to take a lot of work, but I'm very confident that we're going to be able to work together and do everything possible to try to get it done. I thought what I would do very briefly before jumping into some policy specifics on climate and energy is just to give you a basic state of where things are in Washington right now. Less than an hour ago, we had just concluded the end of our Democratic Issues Conference, which normally we would do in person. This year, we did it virtually, much like we're speaking with you right now. We were really honored to have Vice President Kamala Harris as our keynote last night, and then President Biden as our keynote earlier tonight. I'm on East Coast time, so earlier tonight. And President Biden really was hopeful and optimistic for the future, talking about a myriad of issues, but obviously climate being one of them. But this has been a really difficult time. We had 3 Wednesdays in January that I'm sure you're quite familiar with. January 6th, I was sitting right where I am right now in my office when I saw actually a text from Jonathan, who's here on the Zoom with us, showing me something that I thought was inconceivable, which was domestic terrorists breaching the perimeter of the Capitol, making their way towards our office building and towards the Capitol. They evacuated the 2 office buildings adjacent to ours. We weren't sure whether they were going to evacuate us or not. I was in here with one staffer who drew the short straw that day. We're trying to keep as few staff as possible around. And I was very close to heading myself to the gallery to watch the debate that day. It was unthinkable, the events of that day. We're all still processing and getting over them, trying to understand what happened. And of course, my colleagues that were in the gallery, they are still processing the terrible events. I can tell you that we're actually going to be voting later this evening on a couple of things that we were planning on voting on tomorrow. And we're not going to be voting tomorrow because of some specific and credible threats that are still going on against the Capitol for tomorrow, March the 4th. So it's a crazy time. January 13th, of course, was another Wednesday that I won't forget. where the former president was impeached in the House for the second time. And then, of course, the following Wednesday, January 20th, was a great, great day for America with the inauguration of Joe Biden as president and Kamala Harris as vice president. And I'm incredibly proud of both of them and really excited to work with both of them. I have been in Congress since the election of 2018. I first took office January of 2019. I got to serve in the 116th Congress and now in the 117th Congress on 3 committees. The House Natural Resources Committee, where I sit on the Water, Oceans, and Wildlife Subcommittee, which is chaired very capably by my friend and my roommate, Jared Huffman of Northern California, might be some of your congressmen, and also on the Energy and Mineral Resources Subcommittee, which is chaired by Alan Lowenthal, a great friend and colleague from Long Beach. So we're doing a lot in our Natural Resources Committee, just trying to make sure that the fossil fuel industry is treated with the fairness and with the transparency and accountability that they should be treated, whether it's how they are using public lands for their own profit or how they're trying to, frankly, twist policies in their favor. We're doing all we can on the Natural Resources Committee to stand up for our coastline, to fight drilling off our California coast and off the other coasts of this nation, doing everything we can to try to protect our public lands for the good of everyone, not just for the profit of a handful of fossil fuel interests. So that's great work. I love that work, and I hope to do it for as long as I can. I sit on the Select Committee for the Climate Crisis. That's incredibly important as well. I'm one of 3 Californians on the committee, along with Representative Huffman and Representative Julia Brownlee, who represents a district north of Los Angeles. And I was one of 3 freshmen, no longer. Now we're all sophomores with myself and Joe Neguse from Colorado and Sean Caston from Illinois. And so just a great deal of subject matter expertise on the Select Committee. You might be aware that what we did last Congress is we created a 500-page work plan for the new administration, for the Senate, for the House, trying to think through what could we actually achieve with all of the portfolio of legislation that's already been introduced in the House and the Senate, and then where were the gaps, and how do we actually do things that don't just make sense from a greenhouse gas reduction perspective, but also from an economic perspective. And so that was really the exercise, the foundation, the work that we did in the last Congress, and it was excellent. I was so proud of my colleagues, so proud of the committee staff, and you can go to climatecrisis.house.gov and you can see the result of dozens of hearings, and I think they probably met with hundreds of different stakeholders, all of whom provided input. I think Surfrider was one of those that provided input, and we're super grateful for all of that. Now it's not just a trial run. Now it's not just setting the foundation. Now it's all about executing. It's all about working with our new administration. In fact, earlier today, we were on a Zoom with Gina McCarthy, who's our domestic climate czar, and John Kerry, who is our international climate czar. And what a wonderful difference. What a wonderful difference. First of all, we have an administration that accepts climate science, that knows that they have to confront the challenge of climate change with solutions that are commensurate to the challenge that we're facing. And they also understand the simple reality that if we protect the environment, we can also grow the economy. In fact, I would argue that if we create the clean energy jobs of the future, and we lead with domestic manufacturing of things like next generation vehicles, if we lead on sustainable agriculture and building more energy efficient buildings and having more renewable power generation and transforming our electricity grid, it will create massive economic growth in the United States. On the other hand, if we fail to take those steps and lead in the United States, we're still going to be using many of the same products and services to save energy. We'll just be using products and services that were manufactured, invented, and ultimately where the economic reward went to other nations, whether it be China or India or Europe. I'm not picking on them. I'm just telling you the facts. And every economist that I have spoken with, one great example is my friend Marshall Burke, who's an economist at Stanford University, my alma mater. He has specifically done work on the economic consequence of inaction on climate. So often we think of the cost of action. You might hear somebody say, oh my gosh, Joe Biden wants to spend $2 trillion fighting climate change. It's too much, we can't do it. But what they don't tell you, and they're very disingenuous about this, those who are opponents of climate action, they don't tell you the cost of doing nothing. They don't tell you the cost of the status quo. And the cost of the status quo is huge. In fact, Marshall's research suggests, Marshall Burke at Stanford, suggests that if we do nothing, if we just stay with what we're doing today, it will cost the United States economy between 20 and 25 trillion dollars. Now, even if he's half wrong, that's way too much. I don't want to do that. Do you? I don't think so. So we know that not only will taking climate action help us environmentally, reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, help communities like ours in coastal California, but we also know that it'll help us economically. And in an era when we're all fighting this COVID pandemic, and we have not only a public health crisis, but an economic crisis, where we need to create millions of good paying, high wage, high skilled jobs that have been lost as a result of this pandemic, I think the clean energy transition, that acceleration to a more sustainable future, is the ideal way to go about doing that. And I'm so excited that we have Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, that we have Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm and others that we're going to be working with in the new administration to do just that. Now, the last thing I will talk about is kind of what's on the near-term agenda. We have been focused, as you probably know, on something called the American Rescue Plan. This is the COVID relief legislation that we've been working on to tackle the public health crisis, the economic crisis that we're facing. It is bold, it is comprehensive. I think it is a great package. And I think, again, much like climate, the cost of inaction far exceeds the cost of action. This legislation, according to independent analysis by Moody's Analytics, by Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman, I mean, these are not liberal economists. They have told us that if we do not take action, it will take years longer to get back to full employment. But if we take action now, we can get back to full employment as early as next year, as early as next year. And there are millions of jobs that we're either going to get back or not in the next 12 months on the basis of the actions that we take. Now, I'm as concerned as anybody about our long-term debt and deficits, and that is something that we're going to have to deal with downfield. However, right now we are in a crisis and we've got to act accordingly. Now, you might know that we are using a process called budget reconciliation to pass the American Rescue Plan. We passed it in the House. We're going to pass it now in the Senate as early as tomorrow. They're going to amend it, make some amendments to it. They're going to send it back to us in the House, and we're going to vote on it sometime next week. We're going to send it to President Biden for signature. The key there is before March 14th, which is when the expanded unemployment runs out from the bill that we passed back at the end of the year. Now, budget reconciliation is a process where obviously we only need a majority rather than 60 votes, as would be the case because of the Senate filibuster not using reconciliation. We can have the argument of whether or not the filibuster should remain in place or not, but for purposes of this COVID bill, we're using reconciliation. Now, why am I bringing that up? Because the early discussions are that we may need to use reconciliation again. We can use it once every fiscal year. We may need to use it again for climate, transportation, infrastructure, and jobs. And that is the next big piece of legislation that we're going to work on with the Biden-Harris administration, the Build Back Better Recovery Plan. The American Rescue Plan is the COVID bill to deal with the public health crisis. It is a rescue bill. Build Back Better is a true recovery bill, a stimulus bill. And so it's sort of phase one and phase two. Now, I am fighting very hard, and Jonathan on my team, if you're interested in more on this, can tell you more on this. I am fighting very hard that as a big piece of this Build Back Better recovery bill, that we include plenty of resources for climate adaptation and for climate resilience for areas and communities like ours in coastal Southern California and others across the country that are dealing most acutely with the climate crisis. And I can tell you this is one of the only things in the year plus on our Select Committee on the Climate Crisis that has been truly bipartisan. And if you look at our Republican ranking member, it's Garrett Graves of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Well, if you know Baton Rouge, they've had some challenges in Baton Rouge, just as we've had some challenges in San Clemente or in Oceanside or Carlsbad or Del Mar, the other communities in my district. So we're going to fight like crazy to finally make the investments that we need to have a more resilient coast, to have more resilient communities around the country, to address the challenge of the climate crisis, to protect our air and our water and our beaches and our coastline, to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and to protect our outdoors and our public lands. I'm so grateful for your continued advocacy. I will be there fighting with you. I'm excited for the next time. Hopefully we can all get together in person. Thank you for having me, and I'm happy to stick around for as long as I can before I have to go vote. Thank you, everybody.
Congressman Levin, thank you so much. And again, we're being flexible, and I think anyone has realized during COVID is flexibility is key. So we appreciate you.
No one more than me.
Making the time to talk to constituents and share your opening remarks. There was a lot there. And I do think because you are a champion and you have been on climate, and this has been something that has been top of mind for our constituents. And just, I think Pete wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the executive orders and the policies that the Biden administration had put into place a week in to their office. So Pete, you want to elaborate more?
Yeah, thank you, Katie. Yeah, Congressman, it was great to hear your remarks, including those on climate change. And, the recommendations that came out of the House Select Committee are fantastic. And so now the question is, we have a new administration, we have a really strong executive order to tackle the climate crisis. And you mentioned this really interesting intersection between climate, jobs, and equity. So what, as you sort of think about the key opportunities in Congress to move things forward and to complement the executive action, what are some of the specific things you're looking at, with your colleagues in Congress right now?
Well, right now, Pete, because we've got a 50-50 Senate, and because a lot of climate-related policies, well, they should be bipartisan, and while a vast majority of the American people agree on them, some of the Senate Republicans do not share the views of some of their Republican constituents. When we ask, for example, our district, which is a purple district, about climate, 70%, 75% of our constituents want to see bold and aggressive actions on climate. Virtually no one wants to see drill rigs off the California coast. I'm still waiting to find, I had like 250 town hall and house party and other in-person events. And I'd always ask you, towards the end, I would say, does anybody here support offshore drilling? And I could never see a single hand go up until one time a hand went up, but the guy didn't hear me. And it turns out he didn't hear me, right? And then I said, no, we don't want offshore drilling. And he agreed. I bring that up just because I think there's a lack of sync between Republican senators and some of their Republican constituents on this. But it's important, Pete, because at the end of the day, we've got to get it through the Senate, and it's tough with 60 votes. We saw that with Waxman-Markey way back when. So we have to be thinking through which of those climate policies can fit within the confines of budget reconciliation. Now, I don't mean to get all wonky about the Senate procedures, but if you've been following this debate over the $15 minimum wage, you saw that the Senate parliamentarians said that that did not fit within the construct of budget reconciliation. Basically, long story short, to fit within reconciliation, if you're related to taxation or to direct spending, pretty good shot that you're going to fit within budget reconciliation. And if you're doing other things, well, maybe not. Hard to say, because it's got to have a primary budgetary impact rather than having a primary purpose other than a budgetary impact. So it's somewhat subjective, but we are evaluating all of the different menu of great legislation as in the select committee report, and also the others that have been recently introduced by Chairman Frank Pallone of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the Clean Future Act that was just introduced. All of that we're thinking through what can be done through reconciliation, because that is a good starting point to be included in a major climate, jobs, and infrastructure package. Now, on the infrastructure side, look no further than the bill that we passed last year, HR 2, the Moving Forward Act, which is a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill. That is a great starting place. So between the work that we did on the select committee with regard to the report that we did, and with Moving Forward Act also having passed the House last year, I think that's a really good starting point. Our majority in the House, if you've been following, you know this, is down to 5 members. So we're threading a bit of a needle there, but I think that we would have broad support within the Democratic caucus for these policies. But obviously, as we get closer, we'll have to count the votes as we always do. And there's no better vote counter than the Speaker of the House.
Congressman, I know that you have to leave, but you did kind of touch on getting through the Senate. And one of the bills that passed last week, the House, and your roommate and colleague, Huffman, Representative Huffman's bill, the Protecting America's Wilderness Act. This is, again, something our constituents, your constituents, strongly supported. Can you share with us a little bit of your thoughts on our pathway to get this through the Senate? Because this has been something that's been top of mind for us.
Well, those discussions are being had right now. I think it was such an important statement of our values and our priorities that we had that legislation right out front. And as you know, it was a package of 8 different public lands bills that had been worked on for quite some time. And I'm confident that Chuck Schumer and our colleagues in the Senate are going to fight very hard. As you know, you've got some true champions over there. I think, like everything else, they will try very hard to get Republicans on board. And look, I have great hope because of what was achieved with the Great American Outdoors Act, where we got, I think, 73 or 74 votes in the Senate. Steve Daines and others came along at the end. And, not surprisingly, they've got national parks and public lands in some of their states, and they needed to show their support. And I think they acknowledged that it was the right thing to do. The Great American Outdoors Act and the permanent funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, that is not a Democratic idea for blue states or a Republican idea for red states. That's just an American idea to preserve one of our most precious natural assets, which are our extraordinary national parks. And, last I checked, both Roosevelt's, Teddy, and Franklin on different sides of the partisan spectrum, both were absolutely essential in protecting and preserving our national parks and building them to where they are today. And so I'm hopeful that same kind of bipartisan approach can be used. Now, the challenge, as was the case with the Great American Outdoors Act, is there are those fossil fuel interests that want to, drill everywhere they can and just exploit our public lands for profit however they can. That's something that we're going to have to address. But I think the real challenge, ultimately, the overarching challenge is one of campaign finance reform. When you have fossil fuel interests that are more interested in campaign donations than innovation, it makes it challenging. But I think that's changing too. And that's a long way of saying I'm very hopeful we'll get there. But if not, we're going to have to thread that reconciliation needle just as we did with this COVID relief bill.
Thank you for that. And we know that you have to get back to do some votes here. Any closing remarks before we switch over to Jonathan? Again, our community is just so appreciative for your leadership and everything that you do, but any final remarks for the group?
Well, I wish I could stay longer. I'm just grateful to you all for your continued advocacy, your continued activism. Keep the faith, keep doing what you're doing. It matters. Every call, every email, every letter, we get them. We try to respond to all of them. But just know that citizen activism and engagement is everything around here. And ultimately, the People's House still responds to the everyday concerns of constituents. At least if we're doing our jobs, we do. So keep it up. Thank you for all you're doing. And I look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully sometime soon.
We would love that. Thank you so much, Congressman. And we look forward to connecting with you more. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
All right, for our audience that is just joining us, I want to give you a little bit of a debrief here. We had to kind of be flexible and switch our agenda. The congressman had to go back to work and do some last minute votes, and this happens. But we have an amazing panel, and we do have, and I'll let him introduce himself, the Chief Deputy Director for the Congressman Levin, Jonathan Gilbert. So Jonathan, will you introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me to fill out the Congressman's place here for the rest of our session. My name is Jonathan Gilbert. I'm the Congressman's Deputy Chief of Staff, and I cover his work on the Natural Resources Committee and the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. So looking forward to chatting with everyone about the issues we have today.
Great. And Jonathan, we were kind of gonna go back a little bit. I mean, the Congressman did a great job with the opening remarks, and he kind of covered a lot, but I'm wondering if we can kind of get a little more into the details, specifically with the work that he did last Congress and this Congress with the Select Committee on the Crisis or Climate Crisis. Can you go in depth a little bit and just give us an update of what happened last year? Again, he talked about the report, and then how can we move forward with this Congress?
Absolutely. So, the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis was formed at the beginning of last Congress, so at the beginning of 2019, with a goal of laying out a roadmap basically to decarbonize our economy and increase resilience, so addressing the climate crisis. And throughout the Congress, they held many hearings and many meetings with stakeholders, and they put out a public request for information. And all of this was to, put that report together, that path forward together, while having as much input from folks as possible. So last year in the summer, they released their report. It's about 500 pages long. It's been called the most in-depth climate plan ever put out by the federal government. And, it covers the span of, if it has to do with climate change, it's in the report, let me tell you. And so that's resilience, that's environmental justice, that's reducing greenhouse gas emissions from all sectors. It laid out the pathway to achieve a net zero carbon pollution by at least 2050. Our work on it showed that it would save 60,000 lives per year due to reduced air pollution, and save nearly $8 trillion by 2050. So, and that's not even including energy savings. That was last Congress. The Select Committee is back this Congress, and we're going to be working to implement the report with the committees of jurisdiction and with the administration.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. And I mean, with that, and especially, and the Congressman touched on this, the executive orders that happen. Again, this community has been involved with 30 by 30, so appreciate his support on that. But I kind of did want to pivot because we didn't give him as much of a praise with his leadership and your work on the Great American Outdoors Act. And that was, again, a huge win for our community, and everyone here on this panel did work really closely with you on that. And, one of the things with the Great American Outdoors, and I do want to kind of pivot over to my colleague, Lesford Duncan, to talk about a little bit about his work. But with the Great American Outdoors Act, and especially what happened with PAW Plus and the recent amendment to it with the Outdoors for All, and just talking about these access to these amazing public land and these places, the access, which is huge for constituents, but also the opportunity for the mentorship, the programming, the education. And so Les, do you want to kind of share a little bit more of your work and questions to Jonathan on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, Katie, definitely want to share just a tremendous amount of gratitude for the Protecting America's Wilderness and Public Lands Act, and specifically the amendment, the inclusion of the amendment for the Outdoors for All Act. That act, for those of you that might be on the call that aren't familiar, specifically prioritized urban communities and cities where youth often don't have access to parks and public land spaces. And so just wanting to talk a little bit about how that, impacts us very much here on the ground in San Diego. So many of the youth that we work with come from urban communities, come from communities of color, low-income communities, and most of the youth that we engage, over 90% of the youth that we engage, typically express that without programs like ours across the state and across the country, it would be difficult for them to be able to access and to appreciate places like the coast. Places like our amazing mountains and trails here in San Diego. So many of our youth, thinking specifically about Southeast San Diego, where we're located, so many of our youth live about a 15-minute drive away from the coast and have never had the opportunity to go to the beach. Many of the youth, or many of the communities that we work within, especially those south of the 8 freeway, have less than, and according to a report that was put out by the San Diego Foundation, the Parks for Everyone report, live in communities where there are less than 3 acres per every 1,000 residents of park space in their communities. And so the Outdoors for All Act and that amendment really helped or really will help to expand park space in local communities, to build critical infrastructure within those park spaces to make sure that equipment in those parks are up to date, to make sure that those spaces are safe for our youth and for their families to be able to access. And then the legislation goes on as well to provide opportunities for youth to also enjoy and recreate in our public lands beyond their immediate community. Why is this critical? Why is this so important? Well, we recognize that as the demographics of America are changing, and as we're working to, as the demographics of America are changing, and as climate is changing, we recognize that we also need to cultivate a diverse cadre of leaders, of young leaders that are also working, that will carry this work forward to really protect these public spaces that we care most about. We also recognize that getting outdoors also helps improve the health and the mental health of so many of the youth that we work with, and the communities that we work with as well. 93% of our participants, of the over 1,000 participants that we served last year, said that getting outdoors helped them to overcome a lot of the trauma and the impact that came from COVID and everything that took place last year. And so just wanted to share a bit of that to really reflect on, the way that key legislation like these really impact and affect youth, families, and communities in the communities that we serve in your district as well, and across San Diego County, California, and across our country.
Well, absolutely. And I know, Congressman Levin was a co-sponsor last Congress of the Outdoors for All Act, was very happy to support it. It was introduced by his colleague, Congresswoman Berrigan, and I believe in the Senate, former Senator Harris at the time, right? And so, he really appreciates all the work that you're doing, incredibly important work, and wants to be supportive in Congress. Was happy to see the amendment added to the bill last week and then passed the House floor. And it will definitely remain a priority in the Natural Resources Committee as well. I mean, that dedicated funding stream for those communities is very important.
Well, and Jonathan, just to kind of go on that more, because I think with these land protections, with the Outdoors for All Act, and what are we hearing in the Senate? Because again, we worked on the Great American Outdoors Act for decades. And I think the appetite, and especially as Les and all the panelists can say, with the onset of COVID and the demand to outdoor recreation and access, equitable access, right? Not just these wilderness and these vast wild spaces, but what are you hearing, if anything, that you could share with the audience?
Right. Yeah, it's not enough just the wild spaces. It has to be accessible for everybody. Absolutely. Congressman Levin touched on some of it. There will be a push in the Senate to bring folks on the other side of the aisle on board. I also think things change sometimes unexpectedly. Sometimes politically the stars align and you get something like the Great American Outdoors Act, which certainly was driven in part by the election dynamics in 2020 and which senators on the Republican side were up for re-election and maybe needed some help from the White House or the Senate leadership, and that made a difference. So you never know when that sort of thing happens. But the other issue to be aware of is, a lot of legislation in Congress passes in large packages because then it picks up momentum basically, and there's something in there for everyone. And so these bills, if it doesn't go by the route that Congressman Levin talked about previously, then there potentially some of the bills or all of the bills could be added to a large funding package or something of that nature. That's must pass, and that makes a big difference. And there's good things and bad things about doing that. It's preferable to move legislation through what's called regular order, where it goes through the committee and then goes to the House floor and then the Senate, and the same process over there. But there are opportunities to move legislation that we strongly support in a way that we know we'll get through. And you have to take advantage of those opportunities. And certainly that's something we'll always be looking for too.
Well, and one of those opportunities that we saw with POP, Protecting America's Wilderness, was in December with the opportunity in the NDAA, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
how that came around and how that was packaged. And again, I want to shift just because the congressman does represent a huge military community, veterans in Pendleton. And we do have Dr. David Donaldson, who has been active with the connection of veterans. And we talk about that engagement, connection to the outdoors, and what Operation AMP is doing. So Dr. Davidson, do you want to share a little more?
Sure. And thanks for being with us, Jonathan. I want to echo Lesford's gratitude for the work that the congressman is doing to protect our wildlands. I kind of have a split interest in the conversation today because I'm a co-founder of Operation Amped, and we operate in Southern California. We have an annual 3-day event on the north end of Camp Pendleton off Basilone Road, where we host 15 ill, injured, or disabled veterans, their family members, and caregivers, for a 3-day surf camp. And it's probably one of the coolest things I've ever been involved with. The stoke, the fellowship that happens, just kind of hanging out. I actually think our volunteers may benefit even more from the experience than the participants do. But I guess I just wanted to share some of the story. I opened up a chapter here in Montana 2 years ago, and we're doing stand-up paddleboarding primarily in Glacier Park. And we do 10-cara fly fishing off of the paddleboards. So, if you want a quiet space and a place to get away, paddling out on a surfboard and just riding up and down on the swells for a little bit, or, finding your way on McDonald Lake on a paddleboard and doing a little fishing while you're out there, it's just this great place where really interesting things can happen. Our veterans, the population that we serve, they experience things in their rehab, and that's my research agenda is collecting the stories of ill, injured, disabled veterans coming back, and how do they create new meaning in their life. And it's important for a veteran to get back to work and to get a job, but it's also important for a veteran to recreate meaning in their life and a sense of purpose. And a lot of times that happens in our wild spaces. And, whether it's sitting on a surfboard and, you can figure some things out while you're out there, or on the side of a mountain, or on a paddleboard in Glacier Park. But there's 100 stories that I've collected, and I'll share one. There was a young man that was blown up in Afghanistan and came back. He lost both of his legs above the knees. At one point in his rehab at the Naval Medical Center, he hopped in a power wheelchair and just headed straight downtown. He was lost. He was sort of at the end. He was suicidal and didn't have anything. And I think within the next 10 days, he stumbled onto one of our surf events. It was a single day event and had fun. Wasn't a surfer. It was never on his agenda. And wound up at our 3-day camp, I think the end of that same week, and just really connected with surfing, and was able to go out and to get some exercise and to work on his balance and stability in the water, and just work on his head and his heart at the same time. And a couple of years later, I'm sitting up here in Montana literally writing my dissertation in my home office, and my phone rings, and it's Dan, and it's somewhere between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And he said, "Hey, Dave, guess where I'm at?" And I said, "Where you at, Dan?" He says, "I'm in Hawaii." And I said, "Well, what are you doing in Hawaii?" And I'm starting to think time frame and the calendar. And I know that the Pipe Masters on the North Shore of Hawaii is about this time frame. And I said, "Are you in the North Shore?" And he said, "I am." And I asked him who he was with, and I knew who he was with. And he said, "Guess what I did today?" I said, "What'd you do today, Dan?" And he said, "I surfed pipe." I've surfed all my life. I've never surfed pipe. I will probably never, ever surf pipe. And here's a guy that over the span of a couple of years completely created new meaning in his life. And, 10 years ago, I would have asked him, "Who are you? What do you do?" He would have said, "I'm a soldier," or "I'm a Marine," or "I'm a sailor." And if you ask him today, "What do you do?" And he'd say, or "Who are you?" He'd say, I'm a surfer," or "I'm a skier." He called me a couple years back, even later, from the top of our ski resort here, asking me if there was a good coffee shop in town. He was on his way up to Revelstoke in Canada for a ski weekend up there. And again, our outdoor spaces, they're important for everybody, especially our veterans that are struggling. It gives them a place to get out, to think about something else, to be apart from who they were, and to create new meaning and purpose in their lives. So, just a story, one of hundreds that really put some additional meaning behind the work that we're doing, that you're doing, and supporting in protecting our wildlands. So thank you.
I just want to hop in just to kind of support with some anecdote around what David just shared, and really how critical the outdoors are. I think we all on this call share kind of the important value of outdoor recreation and in getting in the outdoors. But never have we seen how critical it is to the health, the mental health, and the well-being of communities. We see it time and time again in so many of our program participants that are struggling or overcoming adversity at home or in their community. Participants that are struggling with substance abuse of a parent, and that for them getting outdoors. Whether it be popping up on a surfboard for the first time, they're definitely not riding in Hawaii. Although we've had some youth go pro in outdoor recreation. Shout out to Ryan Hudson. But for most, it's just being there. It's being present in those spaces. It's getting on the board for the first time and just paddling out, or just being in that space as Others might be rock climbing that huge wall, just being present in nature. There's research that shows, and several studies that say that just being outdoors for 20 to 30 minutes could have the same effect almost as an antidepressant, and helping to relieve stress, lower cortisol levels within the body. And so when we talk about the need for outdoor access, it's greater than a nice to have, right? It's really essential. And limiting outdoor access is truly also one of our greatest public health crises in our country. And so I support what David was saying wholeheartedly. That outdoor access is so critical, and being in those outdoor spaces, especially with positive supportive community, seeing yourself represented in those spaces, feeling safe, feeling that sense of belonging in the outdoors is so essential. And so I think, as we look at what legislation looks like moving forward, I think that's kind of the next frontier, if I may, in kind of thinking about, all right, well, not only how do we conserve these spaces, how do we conserve 30% of the land by 2030, but also how do we connect this next generation to these spaces in a way that really helps to build their own personal resilience, that helps them to see that healing effect for themselves, and then want to also champion those spaces for others, as so many of our leadership program graduates, so many of our youth do. I appreciate and have to give one more shout out to Representative Levin for the time that he spent last year sitting and meeting with a group of 12 of our leadership program participants and discussing some of the legislation and really helping them to understand that legislative process. But really what he was doing also in that moment, whether he realized it or not, was he was helping to build and instill that resilience and that confidence in that next generation of youth, and speaking up and championing environmental protection themselves. And what we know is that, in order for us to see climate resilience, it will really wholly depend on the resilience of the youth, the individuals, the families, and communities that really get to enjoy and recreate in those spaces.
Jonathan, that was a lot, and this is an all-star panel, and all the art panelists are just amazing and do such great work, and it just talks a little bit about the work that we all did around a Great American Outdoors Act and how we kind of came together on this. And I think what we're hearing, and I'm sorry I didn't get to the poll results, but the number one topic people wanted to talk about was equitable access and inclusivity within the outdoors. And so we are getting to about 10 minutes out from the hour, but we have a great question that we got, and I hope that you can answer it because it's in the spirit of collaboration, partnership. But Gary Bowser said, with the increase in outdoor use during COVID restrictions, how can we use this as a jumping board to provide more investments for the outdoors? Trails, stewardship, mind for the constituents. And again, with the passing of Outdoor for All Act last week, what are some of your thoughts? You have a very active audience, right?
Well, I think we certainly can use it and are using it as a springboard for more conservation. I think we've already seen that it's really pushed people to advocate more, because we've all seen over the last 12 months how incredibly important it is. But also just, from a legislative perspective, Congressman Levin was talking about an infrastructure package, a Build Back Better infrastructure package. And I certainly expect that we'll see conservation pieces of that, and outdoor access pieces of that. With the Natural Resources Committee, nothing is set in stone right now, but the Natural Resources Committee, I expect will have a piece, and those will certainly be top priorities for the committee and for the congressmen on the committee. So I think just right now with the American Rescue Plan happening, that will provide momentum with the COVID focus into the infrastructure package. And I think you'll see a connection there.
You can tell we're really excited because we're coming off the momentum of Great American Outdoors. And we, again, the congressman and you and your entire staff and colleagues are working on definitely the COVID relief, but the Build Back Better and our opportunities to integrate these climate initiatives and priorities, as well as what we can do to improve access to the outdoors, wild spaces, but also close to home, with the work that Les does, with what David does, and especially what Surfrider Foundation is doing. So we have just a few minutes left. I wanted to give our panelists, because y'all are just seasoned pros, and I'm so thankful to have every one of you on this discussion, but just some final remarks, because no offense to the congressman's roommate, Congressman Huffman, but we had an amazing turnout, considerably a little more than his. So we'll tell him that later. But we have an active audience right now that wants to hear from the panelists, and then also final remarks from you, Jonathan. So Pete, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I'll just say that I was really struck by Congressman Levin's comments on Great American Outdoors Act, and, building that bipartisan support for something that's so hard to do in Congress right now. And I think the lesson there was, it wasn't just about environmental protection. It was about jobs, it was about economy, but also it was about quality of life and equity and mental health. And I think just a country that was sort of in the grips of COVID-19, and we're sort of as a nation maybe rediscovering the value of our public lands and waters. And so I guess for me, it's just a good reflection for our community of how we talk to our elected leaders about why we need to protect our public lands and waters, and all the different arguments that we need to make for that, not to mention climate change and everything else.
Les, you want to go next?
Sure. I think I might have said a lot in my last comments, but I think just to summarize, I would just say again, tremendous thanks again for Representative Levin's just leadership on several of these issues, but especially around increasing that access and equity to the outdoors. And I think it's so important that as this work continues on, that we leverage every opportunity to invite new voices to the table, to invite diverse voices to the table, and really help to cultivate again that next generation of environmental leaders. I think that there are some efforts also in motion around an outdoor equity fund on that federal level, kind of following the lead that several states, our state included, has taken in really investing not only in the infrastructure and in the public land conservation, but also investing in the programming needed to connect youth to those spaces in the first place. And so I think our collective ask is again asking for Representative Levin's leadership and pushing forward that outdoor equity fund that helps to cultivate the next generation.
Dr. Davidson.
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to finish up again, saying thank you for the hard work, protecting our outdoor spaces and our wildlands. And, representing Operation AMP is truly an honor. But, I just want to again, give a shout out to some other organizations that are in Southern California, that are just everywhere in the US that are doing this work to get veterans outside. Paradox Sports has been around forever. Operation AMP has been around for 15 years. The summer and winter sports clinics at the VA. And I know that there's a group of veterans up at Bear Mountain skiing this weekend, because my daughter, who is finishing her final internship for rec therapy at Sac State, is with them, and she sent me a picture this morning. So that's a weird circle that's sort of coming complete. But there's a lot of really good organizations that are, they think local, they act local, that are doing this work with veterans, and plenty in the 49th. So Jonathan, I'll extend the invitation now. You can pass it on to the congressman. I don't have the dates yet, but it's a long weekend in August. Come out and surf with us. We'll be at north end of Camp Pendleton off Bassalonia, right there at the Bluffs. So come surf with us.
Sounds pretty awesome to me.
All right.
Well, I'll just say on behalf of the congressman, thank you to everybody, to our panelists, to Outdoor Alliance, for inviting him to participate participate today and having me in his place. So thank you. Actually, I didn't get to mention this before, but the congressman does sit on the Veterans Affairs Committee. He's the vice chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee. And so supporting our veterans is absolutely a top priority. And it's awesome to hear about your work, Dave, and how we can maybe fit that into our work on the Veterans Affairs Committee. But, I'll just, again, say thank you. Access, conservation, resilience, fighting the climate crisis are all top priorities for the congressman. They will remain top priorities. I think he would encourage everyone out there to engage with their representatives on those issues as well. Make your voices heard, just incredibly important. So thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Jonathan. And just real quick, because again, we got such a strong audience here, participants. If folks want to connect with some of our panelists, Pete, what's the best way to folks to interact with you? Or Surfriders, or become a member, right?
Yeah, you can go to surfrider.org, and that's probably the easiest way to learn more about Surfrider and connect with your local chapter, or you can reach out to me.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete. Les.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to visit us online at outdooroutrreach.org, or follow us on Facebook or Instagram, and I'll drop that in the chat as well.
Awesome. Dr. Donaldson.
And the same with me, operationamped.org, AMPED.org. And yeah, check out the website, and there's email links in there for all the board members.
Okay, great. Again, thank you everyone for joining Outdoor Alliance. We could not do this without all of our members, and more importantly, the constituents. I think as Representative Levin said, use your voice, connect with your elected officials, and really the power is in the people. So we appreciate you all so much. We did get a lot of folks that are interested in raffle. We'll do that afterwards, and we'll connect with you via email. So thank you to Jonathan Gilbert and Congressman Levin and my entire panelists, and also our interpreters. Thank you so much, Jessica and Norma, for sharing your services and your expertise with us, okay? Everyone be safe, and we look forward to connecting with you more this year, okay? Bye, everyone.
Good, thank you.